And what do you say? And I have not spent that much time in the jungle. I spent I think the longest I've been in the jungle is maybe a month. And it wasn't as bad as this. It wasn't raining as that much. But I can't even imagine just that constant. There's no escape from it. There's no escape from it. And it's even worse for Leckie, and I'll tell you why. Back to the book. I would be wet, not only from the rain, for sometimes it stopped, and at other times it did not fall so fast that a jungle hammock could not repel it. But because an affliction which had begun the moment I left Australia, was now again active. It had begun during the discomforts of Guadalcanal, had disappeared in the civilized living of Melbourne, and had reappeared on Goodenough Island, New Guinea, and now on New Britain. I learned later from doctors to call it enuresis. When asleep, the bladder empties, and that is that. So he puts that really nicely, but here's what's going on. Because of the stress that he's under, when he goes to bed, he pisses in his pants. And it's just, he can't stop it. And there's nothing he can do about it. And it won't go away. In fact, it went away. It will go away when the stress stops. When he went to Melbourne, it's all good. It stops. Get back out there in the stress of combat, the stress of the environment. And when he goes to bed, he pisses himself. And certainly he made a decision to put that in this book for a reason. And it does fall into the story a little bit, but the reason I love that he put it in there is because it's just another thing that he's dealing with, and he's not even ashamed of it. He's like, I'm stressed out, I'm scared, and I'm pissing myself. But guess what? I'm still going on patrol. Back to the book. The last patrol was a prolonged one of several days. We were taken by landing boat down the east coast to a place called Old Natamo, and there deposited. The place had once been inhabited by the Japs, but all their emplacements were now empty. Those of the enemy who were discovered were in the last extremities of ordeal. Some were overtaken, crawling on their hands and knees, some so badly decomposed it was as though their feet were rotting off. Some weighing perhaps no more than 80 pounds, some without weapons, all without food, and all possessed of that indomitable fighting spirit that was the Japanese Imperial Army's greatest asset, the one single factor that made a poorly equipped soldier a first-rate foe. They all resisted, and they were all destroyed, bayoneted for the most part. For it was folly to fire on patrol in unfriendly, unknown territory. One of these stragglers was strangled in cold blood by the Kid, a youngster who, although already a veteran of Guadalcanal, was hardly acquainted with a razor. He would go mad 2 months later. So they come up across these Japanese, total 80 pounds, malnourished. Some of them didn't even have weapons, and they're just trying to fight anyways. He ends up with a hernia. So Leckie ends up with a hernia, and he gets pulled off to go take a look at his hernia, and they say, yeah, you got a bad hernia, but it's not bad enough. You're going back to the front. Then the army comes and replaces them there, and next move is they go to train at a place called Pavuvu Island. They're doing another training to get ready for another island campaign. And here we go back to the book. The food was bad too, and the tents were rotten and punctured with holes. There was no water except what was caught in our helmets during the night. We bathed by dashing naked into the rain, soaping ourselves madly in a race against the probability of the rain ceasing and being left streaked with sticky soap. And we washed our clothes by boiling them in cans of rainwater. Our jungle rot had become so bad, so persistent, that there was an appointed time each afternoon for the men to take off their shoes and socks and to lie out on their sacks with corrosive feet thrust out into the sun. But we had borne all this before, and we could bear it again. Nor could mere bad food or leaky tents press upon the ardor of my comrades. It was the death of hope that bore us down. There had always been hope, hope of relief, hope of the sun, hope of victory, hope of survival. But when they came and told us that none of us were going home on rotation, we strangled hope and turned into wooden soldiers. The future looked to innumerable enemy-held islands and innumerable assaults, and we had already noticed how the ranks of the New River Originals were dwindling with every action. There were even a few suicides to suggest how despairing some could find the situation. Then the thing changed. They came and said half of the originals could go home. So these guys get the word. Hey, look, we're preparing for another assault, but half of you originals are going to go home. There was joy. And then, once the method of selection for the stateside bound became known, there was anger. There would be a drawing, a stateside lottery, in which men's names would be pulled from a hat, but only the names of those who had never been in trouble. I was among those whose name did not go into the hat, and so was Runner and Hoosier and Chicken and Souvenirs and a host of others. It seemed that the originals of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, had been neatly divided into good guys and bad guys. Among us there raged a profane anger. I know now how a convict must feel upon being turned down at job after job because of his past. That was what disqualified us, our past. It made no difference that we had been punished. Yes, punished again and again, for it had become customary to solve all problems of selection this way, by marking brig rats for dirty duty and excluding them from special benefits. Nor did it matter that we had good war records. In retrospect, it's easy to forgive my commanders this, but then it was hard. It was too much like being unfairly condemned to death. The injustice of it overwhelmed me, and I burned with a resentment that was dangerous to carry around. So, what a nightmare. They say, look, we're going to have a little lottery. Some of you guys are going to get home. Everyone's happy. And they say, oh, by the way, if you've been in any trouble, you don't get on the list. And that's a death sentence. The way he's seeing it right now. They're seeing it as a death sentence. Like, oh, we're going to keep doing this island hopping campaign. We're going to keep going. There's all these innumerable islands that need to be taken down. You're going to be on all of them. And you've already seen X number of guys that you had killed. And you're going to keep going until you're killed. And so this was like a death sentence.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the guys who might be able to go, they're right there.
Yeah,
and you're
they're
like,
right next to you.
Yeah, man.
And those guys probably did a lot of the same crap, right?
Yeah. Dang, yeah.
So, back to the book. My enuresis was more noticeable than before. Perhaps, too, the agitation of the moment aggravated it. I know that the men in my tent had been urging me to report it to sickbay. I did. The doctor, who knew of my case, ordered me to Banica. I was leaving in the morning. So, with that, he basically says, okay, you know what? I'm pissing on myself. The guys have been telling me to go see the doctor about it. I haven't done that. I have a hernia. I'm going to go to medical. So he goes to medical, and the doctor says, okay, you're going to go to Banica, and Banica is a island where they just are set up to handle wounded. Mm. And when he gets to Banica, it's kind of shocking. Back to the book. Banica was a flesh pot. Banica was the big town. Banica was Broadway. Banica had women. It had buildings of steel and wood. It had roads. It had thousands of sailors as sleek as campons. It had movie amphitheaters. It had electric lights. It had canteens overflowing with candy and comforts. And Banica had beer. Walking with the others from the beach to the Navy hospital, I felt like a hick on his first visit to New York. Jeeps and trucks and staff cars swept over the island's roads, raising a busy cloud of dust. Cranes croaked and cranked on the beach, loading and unloading the boats. MPs patrolled a stockade of pointed sticks behind which dwelt the women, the Navy nurses and Red Cross workers. Everyone was well-fed and unworried. The seat of every pair of pants was filled and happy. We, the lean ones, who wore our discontent on our faces and carried our nervous impatience in our hands, must have been a disturbing presence in that purring island incubator. Yet as I walked along, I was filled with the uneasy suspicion that it would be the image of Banica and not Pavuvu that would be presented to America as the Pacific War. They do a pretty good job of this in the Pacific, in the series. Not as good as they maybe could have done, because they show the guys coming onto a beach and there's nurses and they're dressed in like beautiful clean white and they're literally handing out lemonade. Mm-hmm. And it's such a contradiction to what they've been living. Mm-hmm. So you get that, but this image is even crazier in my mind of coming onto this island. You've been coming off Pavuvu, you're living in the hell, and here these guys are, whatever, a quick flight away, and they've got movie theaters, and they've got beer, and they've got women running around. It's just totally different. And I've talked about that a bunch of times on here. Like, you could be in World War II, but if you were on the island of Banica, wasn't that much of a sacrifice as it was compared to somebody that was on the island hopping campaign. Just, it's not. And it's the same thing, there's places I was in Iraq where I would say, God, this is crazy how nice this is. They got a swimming pool. Some of the base said swimming pools. They got a nice gym. They got a nice chow hall. Then you'd go out to some outstation in the middle of, or some forward operating base, and these dudes would be living hard. Totally different for different people.